Han Do-hyun had never seen so many aliens in one place. The hallway of the Galactic Academy stretched out before him like the throat of some enormous beast, lined with smooth white walls and soft blue lights that hummed quietly overhead. Students passed him on both sides. Some walked on 2 legs, some walked on 4. One floated past in a glass sphere filled with green liquid, its many eyes blinking at him without interest. Yoon Sora walked beside him, carrying a data case under her arm. She was shorter than him by a full head, but she moved with the kind of calm, steady confidence that only came from years of real combat experience. She had served 2 tours with the Republic of Korea Marine Corps before joining his research team, and nothing seemed to rattle her, not even this. "They're staring," she said quietly. "They're curious," Do-hyun replied. "We're the first humans to teach here." "That's the way you look at a new animal at the zoo." He couldn't argue with that. The Galactic Academy on Station Oreth was the most respected military and diplomatic school in the known galaxy. Over 300 species sent their best and brightest here to study war, strategy, politics, and history. Humanity had only been part of the Galactic Union for 12 years, and their invitation to send a lecturer was widely understood for what it was: a polite gesture, not a mark of respect. Humans had not fought a single interstellar war. They had barely left their own solar system. In the eyes of the galaxy, they were children. Do-hyun found his lecture hall at the end of the corridor. It was a wide, curved room with tiered seating that rose steeply toward the back wall. About 40 students were already seated. He scanned the room and saw a mix of species he recognized from his briefing files. In the front row sat a Mirian, tall, thin, with 4 arms and skin that looked like pale blue glass. Her name was Tella. The Mirians were famous for their mathematical approach to warfare. Every battle, every casualty, every outcome was reduced to equations. They did not believe in luck or bravery. They believed in numbers. Behind her, taking up 2 seats, was a Dravari named Ogun. He was enormous, easily 3 times Do-hyun's weight, with thick gray skin that looked like stone armor plating. The Dravari Empire had never lost a war in 600 years. They were proud of this. Very proud. Near the middle sat Fail, a Lynesi. She was slender and pale, almost ghostly, with large, dark eyes that never seemed to blink. The Lynesi were telepaths. They could feel the emotions of those around them, and they considered physical warfare to be primitive and disgusting, a thing that civilized species should have outgrown long ago. And in the back row, watching quietly, was Rosha. She was Velkai, smooth blue-green skin, wide dark eyes, and webbed hands that marked her aquatic origins. The Velkai relied on technology to win their wars. Better ships, better weapons, better shields. If you had the superior machine, you won. It was that simple. None of them looked impressed. Do-hyun set his data case on the desk at the front of the room and connected it to the hall's display system. A large holographic screen flickered to life behind him. "Good morning," he said. "My name is Professor Han Do-hyun. I will be teaching this semester's module on comparative combat histories." Ogun spoke immediately. His voice was deep and rough, like rocks grinding together. "I mean no offense, Professor, but your species has never fought an interstellar war. What exactly are you qualified to teach us?" A few students made small sounds of agreement. Tella's crystalline fingers tapped her desk in what Do-hyun's briefing notes said was a gesture of polite doubt. Do-hyun smiled. He had expected this. "You're right," he said. "We haven't fought a war in space. Not yet. But I think you'll find that what we did before we got here is worth studying." He tapped the display. A map appeared, not a star chart, but a flat, old-fashioned map of a coastline. Blue on one side, green on the other, a narrow strip of water between them. "I'm going to present you with a case study," he said. "I will describe a battle. You will analyze it using your own military training. At the end, I will tell you which species fought it. Understood?" The students settled in. This, at least, was familiar ground. Do-hyun began. Two great powers were at war. One had conquered nearly an entire continent and built heavy fortifications along its coastline. Walls of concrete, buried weapons, millions of mines, and hundreds of thousands of soldiers in defended positions. The other power needed to cross a narrow body of water and establish a foothold on that coastline to begin taking back the continent. He paused. The crossing was approximately 30 kilometers of open water. The defenders knew the attack was coming. The fortifications had been built over years. The invasion force would arrive on open beaches with almost no cover. He looked around the room. The invasion force loaded over 150,000 soldiers onto boats. Not warships, transport boats. Flat-bottomed, thin-skinned, barely armored. When the doors of these boats opened, the soldiers inside would step directly into the line of fire. Tella's four hands had gone still. She was calculating. On the morning of the invasion, Do-hyun continued, thousands of these boats crossed the water under heavy fire. Soldiers drowned. Boats sank. Those who reached the beach were cut down in large numbers. In some places, the first wave was almost completely destroyed. He let the silence sit for a moment. But the ones behind them kept coming. And the ones behind them. And the ones behind them. They climbed over the bodies of the dead. They pushed forward through gunfire that no reasonable calculations said they could survive. Within hours, they had a foothold. Within days, they had broken through. He looked at the class. "Now, analyze." Tella spoke first. The casualty projections for such an assault would be catastrophic. No rational command structure would approve this plan. It is mathematically inadvisable. Ogun shook his heavy head. No Dravari commander would order soldiers into certain death with no armor and no cover. This is waste, not war. Fail's dark eyes were narrow. The fear alone would be overwhelming. No telepathic species could function under such psychic distress. The soldiers would break. Rosha leaned forward. What kind of orbital bombardment was used to soften the defenses before the landing? Do-hyun waited until they were all finished. Then he tapped the display. The map zoomed out. A single blue planet appeared. "There was no orbital bombardment," he said quietly. "There were no energy shields, no advanced armor. The species that fought this battle had not yet left its own atmosphere." The room went very still. "This was Earth," Do-hyun said. "The year was 1944 by our calendar. The soldiers were human, the boats were made of steel, and the weapons that were killing them fired simple metal projectiles." Nobody spoke. Ogun stared at the casualty numbers glowing on the display. His stone-gray face was unreadable. But his voice, when it came, was very slow and very careful. "They knew," he said. "They knew they would die on that beach. And they still went." Do-hyun nodded. Many of them wrote letters to their families the night before. They said goodbye to their wives, their children, their parents. They sealed the letters and gave them to the officers behind them. Then they got on the boats. The lecture hall was completely silent. 40 alien students from a dozen species sat motionless, staring at the holographic image of a thin strip of beach on a small blue world none of them had ever visited. Nobody asked another question. Do-hyun turned off the display. "That will be all for today." He picked up his data case and walked out. Sora followed. Word spread fast. By the second week, Do-hyun's lecture hall had twice as many students as before. They came from other departments, diplomacy, engineering, xenobiology, dragging their chairs in and sitting along the walls when the seats ran out. Nobody talked about it openly. But something about that first lecture had crawled under the skin of every student who had been there. And they had told others, and those others had come to see for themselves. Do-hyun noticed. Sora noticed too. "You've got fans," she said the morning before the second lecture, as they walked through the corridor toward the hall. "They're not fans," Do-hyun said. "They're scared. They just don't know it yet." He was right. Do-hyun stood before the packed room and brought up the display without any introduction. A city appeared, gray, frozen, surrounded by enemy lines on all sides. Snow covered everything. The temperature readings along the bottom of the screen showed numbers far below freezing. A city of 3 million people, Do-hyun began, was surrounded by an enemy army. All roads in and out were cut. No food could enter. No supplies. No reinforcements. The enemy did not try to storm the city directly. They simply waited. They bombed it from the air. They shelled it with heavy weapons. And they waited for the people inside to starve. He paused. The siege lasted 872 days. Tella's crystalline hands moved rapidly, running calculations on her personal device. She looked up with an expression Do-hyun had not seen from her before. It was confusion. In the first winter, Do-hyun continued, the daily food ration dropped to 125 grams of bread per person. That is less than the weight of a small fruit. The bread was made partly from sawdust, because there was no flour left. People ate leather belts. They boiled wallpaper to drink the paste. They ate glue. The room was very quiet. Hundreds of people died every day. They froze in their homes. They collapsed in the streets. Parents watched their children die and could do nothing. The ground was too frozen to bury the dead, so the bodies were stacked in the courtyards and left there. Fail, the Lanesi telepath, had closed her dark eyes. Her thin hands were pressed flat against the desk in front of her, and her breathing had become shallow. She could not feel what those people had felt. They were long dead, on a world far away, but her imagination was enough. And yet Do-hyun said, they did not surrender. Ogun leaned forward. His massive body shifted in his seat, and the chair groaned under his weight. "Why?" he asked. His deep voice was quieter than usual. "Because they believed there are things worse than death," Do-hyun said simply. The enemy that surrounded them had a policy of total destruction. If the city fell, the people would not be taken prisoner. They would be erased. Every man, woman, and child. The defenders knew this, so they chose to starve, to freeze, to watch their families die around them, rather than open the gates. Tella spoke. Her voice was tight and precise. "I have run the numbers 3 times now. By every rational model, the city should have surrendered within 60 days. The probability of survival past that point was less than 4%. Continued resistance was statistically meaningless. And yet they held for 872 days, Do-hyun said. Over 1 million civilians died. The survivors were walking skeletons, but the city never fell. Among the Dravari, there was a deeply respected tradition called the honorable yield. When a battle was clearly lost, a commander would surrender to preserve the lives of soldiers who would otherwise die for nothing. It was considered wise and noble. The idea that an entire city of millions would choose slow death over surrender was something Ogun simply could not fit inside his understanding of war. "This is not strategy," he said finally. "This is something else." "Yes," Do-hyun agreed. "Humans have a word for it, but it does not translate well. The closest meaning is the refusal to be broken." He moved on. The display changed. The frozen city disappeared, and in its place appeared a bright flash of light, a single searing white point that expanded outward in a perfect sphere, followed by a massive rising column of smoke and fire shaped like a mushroom. "A weapon," Do-hyun said, "developed during the same war. A single device, small enough to fit inside one aircraft. capable of destroying an entire city in a single moment. Tens of thousands of people killed in less than a second. Tens of thousands more dying in the days and weeks that followed from burns and radiation poisoning. He looked at the room. This weapon was used, twice, on civilian cities. The war ended shortly after. Rosha, the Velkai student in the back row, had her webbed hands pressed over her mouth. "But that is not the part I want you to focus on," Do-hyun said. After the war ended, the winning side did not destroy the weapon. They built more. And the losing side rebuilt itself, and within a few years, they built their own. And then other nations built theirs. Within 2 decades, there were enough of these weapons on Earth to destroy all life on the planet several times over. He let that settle. 2 great powers pointed these weapons at each other. Each side knew that if they attacked, the other would fire back, and both would be destroyed. So neither fired. They sat like that, with the power to end their own species, resting on the decision of a few individuals, for 50 years. Fail opened her eyes. She looked directly at Do-hyun, and for the first time, there was real emotion on her pale face. It was not admiration. It was horror. "By Linnesi standards," she said slowly, "a species that builds weapons capable of destroying itself and then chooses to live under the constant threat of that destruction has crossed what we call the madness threshold. It means the species is psychologically broken beyond recovery." Do-hyun met her gaze calmly. "We call it deterrence," he said. "We chose to live on the edge of extinction every single day for 50 years, and we made it work. Nobody fired. The world survived." "By luck," Fail said. "By will," Do-hyun corrected. The lecture ended. Students filed out slowly, many of them not speaking. The alien chatter that usually filled the corridors after class was absent. There was only the soft sound of footsteps and the hum of the station's systems. Sora stood near the exit, watching them leave. Several students stopped as they passed her. A young Myron looked at her and asked, very quietly, "Are humans afraid of themselves?" Sora thought about it. She thought about the things she had seen during her service. She thought about the quiet weight that every human soldier carried, the knowledge of what their species was capable of, the history that ran in their blood like a dark river. "Every single day," she said. The student nodded and walked away without another word. That evening, Grand Scholar Ivan summoned Do-hyun to his office. Ivan was old even by Dravari standards. His stone-gray skin was cracked and pale, and he moved with the careful slowness of someone who had carried great weight for a very long time. He sat behind a wide desk covered with data tablets, and looked at Do-hyun with eyes that were sharp despite his age. "I have received concerns," Ivan said. "Not about the accuracy of your lectures, about their effect. Several students have reported difficulty sleeping. One Linnesi student requested psychological support after your second session." Do-hyun said nothing. "I am not telling you that you are wrong," Ivan continued. "I am asking you to consider softening the material." Do-hyun was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "With respect, Grand Scholar, the material is already soft. I have been choosing the gentler examples." Ivan stared at him for a long time. Then he nodded once and waved his heavy hand toward the door. "Continue, then." That night, long after the corridors had gone dark and quiet, Rosha sat alone in the empty lecture hall. The display was still active, cycling slowly through the images Do-hyun had shown. She sat in the back row where she always sat, her dark Velkai eyes fixed on the holographic projection of a mushroom cloud rising over a ruined city on a world she had never seen. She sat there for a very long time, not moving, barely breathing, watching that terrible cloud rise and bloom and spread across the sky of a small blue planet on the other side of the galaxy. And very softly, to no one but herself, she whispered, "They did this to their own world, and they are still here." By the middle of the semester, the class had changed. The extra students who had come out of curiosity were mostly gone. The ones who remained were the original 40, and they were different now. They sat straighter. They arrived early. They did not talk before the lectures began. They just waited, quiet and watchful, like soldiers waiting for a briefing they knew would be hard to hear. Ogun was the first to arrive that morning. He was waiting outside the lecture hall when Do-hyun and Sora came around the corner. The big Dravari stood with his thick arms crossed over his chest, and his stone-gray face carried an expression Do-hyun had not seen before. It was not anger. It was not confusion. It was the look of someone who had seen something they could not unsee. "Professor Han," Ogun said, "I need to ask you something before class." Do-hyun stopped. "Go ahead." "I have been doing my own research into your species' history." His deep voice was careful, as if he was handling something fragile. "I found a record, a timeline of every conflict fought by humans since they first began recording their history. Every war, every battle, every uprising." Do-hyun waited. "In over 5,000 years of recorded history," Ogun said slowly, "your species has experienced fewer than 300 years of total peace, and never more than a few decades at a time without a major conflict." "That is correct," Do-hyun said. Ogun's eyes, small, dark, set deep in his heavy skull, locked onto Do-hyun's. "I checked the data 4 times. I assumed it was corrupted. It is not. It is not." "You have never stopped fighting," Ogun said. "Not once. Not in your entire history as a species. Every single generation of humans has known war." Do-hyun nodded. There was nothing to add. It was simply true. Ogun stood there for a long moment, then turned and walked into the lecture hall without another word. Sora watched him go and let out a slow breath. "He looked like someone just told him the floor was made of glass," she said quietly. "For him, it is," Do-hyun replied. The class filled. Do-hyun activated the display. This time the image was a dense jungle, green, wet, and dark, with tangled trees so thick that the sky was barely visible above. "Today's case study," he began, "is different from the ones before. In every previous example, I showed you humans fighting with equal or superior force. Large armies, powerful weapons, massive industrial support. Today, I want to show you what happens when humans are the weaker side." He could feel the shift in the room. Tella leaned forward slightly. Rosha's dark eyes widened. A small nation was invaded by the most powerful military force on its planet. The invaders had better weapons, better training, better supplies, complete control of the air, and more soldiers than the defenders could ever hope to match. By every rational measure, the war should have been over in months. He paused. It lasted 20 years. Tella's crystalline fingers froze mid-calculation. The defenders could not meet the invaders in open battle. They would be destroyed. So they did not fight in the open. They dug tunnels, thousands of kilometers of tunnels beneath the jungle floor. Entire underground cities, with hospitals, kitchens, command centers, and ammunition stores, all hidden beneath the feet of the enemy. Do-hyun brought up a cross-section diagram on the display. The tunnel network was staggering in its complexity. Multiple levels, ventilation shafts disguised as termite mounds, underwater entrances, trapdoors hidden under cooking fires. They fought from these tunnels. They used the jungle itself as a weapon. Every trail could hide a pit. Every bush could hide a fighter. Every step the invaders took was on ground the defenders knew better than their own heartbeat. The invaders had aircraft that could level entire forests. The defenders simply went underground and waited, then came back up and fought again. Ogun was absolutely still. Among the Dravari, warfare was about strength meeting strength. Two armies faced each other, the stronger won, and that was honorable. What Do-hyun was describing was something else entirely. War without a front line. War without uniforms. War where the enemy could be anywhere and nowhere at once. The invaders spent 20 years trying to win, Do-hyun said. They dropped more explosives on that small nation than had been used in all of their previous wars combined. They used chemical weapons to strip the leaves from the jungle so they could see the fighters hiding below. He looked around the room, and they lost. The silence was thick. The defenders won not because they were stronger. They won because they refused to fight the war the invaders wanted to fight. They changed the rules. They made the cost of occupation so high, so constant, and so painful that the invaders eventually decided it was not worth it, and went home. Fail spoke from her seat. Her voice was thin and troubled. This is not warfare. This is something closer to what the Linnesi would call an immune response. The entire population became a single organism, rejecting an invader. That is a very good way to describe it, Do-hyun said. Humans call it guerrilla warfare, and it is one of the oldest strategies in our history. When humans cannot win with force, they win with patience, with cleverness, and with the willingness to suffer longer than the enemy is willing to make them suffer. He changed the display. The jungle disappeared. In its place was a single photograph, black and white, grainy, showing a thin young man in a military uniform. He wore no weapon. He carried only a medical kit and a length of rope. This is a different kind of case study, Do-hyun said. This is not about a war. This is about one man. He told them the story, a soldier who refused to carry a weapon because his personal beliefs would not allow him to kill. He was mocked, beaten, and nearly thrown out of the military, but he insisted on serving as a medic. He wanted to be on the battlefield, not to take lives, but to save them. During one of the bloodiest battles of the war, Do-hyun said, this man's unit was ordered to climb a steep cliff and take the position at the top. They reached the top, and they were met with devastating fire. The unit was torn apart. The survivors were ordered to retreat back down the cliff. Do-hyun's voice was steady, but softer now. This man did not retreat. He stayed at the top of the cliff, alone, surrounded by enemy soldiers, and began dragging wounded men to the edge. One by one, he tied them to his rope and lowered them down the cliff face to safety. He did this for 12 hours. He crawled through gunfire on his stomach, found wounded soldiers, pulled them to the cliff edge, and lowered them down. Nobody breathed. He saved 75 men that day. 75, alone, unarmed, under constant enemy fire, for 12 hours. And when asked later how he kept going, he said he just kept praying the same thing, over and over. Please, let me get one more. Fail's dark eyes were open wide, and there was something glistening on her pale cheeks that might have been tears, though Do-hyun did not know if Linnesi could cry. I have been trying, she said slowly, to understand humans as warriors, but this man was not a warrior. No, Do-hyun agreed, he was not. Then what was he? Do-hyun thought about it. He was the reason we fight, he said. That is the part most species miss about us. Humans do not just fight to destroy. We fight to protect. And sometimes the bravest ones among us never fire a single shot. After class, Tella found Sora in the corridor. The Mirian was quiet and serious, her 4 hands clasped together in front of her. In what Sora had learned was a gesture of deep thought. I have run every simulation I am capable of running, Tella said. I have modeled your species' history through every analytical framework available to me. In every single model, a species with your level of internal conflict should have destroyed itself. You should be extinct. The mathematics say you should not exist. Sora looked at her for a moment. Then she smiled. Not a big smile, just a small, tired one, and said, We get that a lot. Tella did not seem to know what to do with that answer. She stood there, her glass-like skin catching the blue light of the corridor, and said nothing. Behind them, neither of them noticed the heavy figure standing in the doorway of the lecture hall. Grand Scholar Ivan had come to watch the lecture in person for the first time. He stood in the back row, his ancient Dravari body still and silent, his cracked stone face showing nothing at all. He had listened to the entire lecture without making a sound. The last weeks of the semester changed the feel of the entire academy. It was not something anyone could point to directly, but the teachers in other departments noticed it. Students from Do-hyun's class were quieter than before. They sat differently in other lectures, more still, more focused, as if they were measuring everything they heard against something heavy they now carried inside them. 3 students had changed their thesis topics. 2 had requested access to the Academy's restricted archive on pre-spaceflight civilizations. 1 Miraean student had submitted a formal request to study Earth's military history as a full academic discipline, something that had never been done before at the Galactic Academy. The humans had been here for less than 1 semester, and something had shifted. Ambassador Baek Juno arrived on Station Orith without warning. She was a small woman with short gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had spent 20 years in diplomacy and 8 years as humanity's representative to the Galactic Union, and she understood better than anyone how the galaxy saw her species: young, unpredictable, and not entirely trusted. She met Do-hyun and Sora in a private room near the Academy's diplomatic wing. The walls were soundproofed, the door locked behind them. "The Intelligence Bureau has been monitoring your lectures," Juno said without any introduction. She sat across from them with her hands folded on the table. "Not just recording them, analyzing them. Your class sessions have been flagged in internal union communications." Do-hyun was not surprised. Flagged how? Concerned, several member species have raised questions about whether your lectures constitute a form of psychological intimidation. The Lynesi delegation in particular has filed a formal note of concern. Sora leaned back in her chair. "Our own history." "Yes," Juno said, "and that is exactly what worries them. They have been watching you present factual, verified accounts of human warfare, and the reaction among students and faculty has been significant enough to draw attention at the diplomatic level. Some union members are now privately questioning whether humanity should have been admitted to the union at all." The room was quiet for a moment. "Should I stop?" Do-hyun asked. Juno looked at him for a long time. Her sharp eyes were steady and calm. "No," she said. "They need to hear it. All of it. They have spent 12 years thinking of us as the new species, the young ones, the ones who haven't done anything yet. They need to understand what they are standing next to." She stood up, smoothed her jacket, and walked to the door. Before she left, she turned back. "Your final lecture is next week. Make it count." The day of the final lecture, the hall was full beyond its capacity. Students filled every seat, lined every wall, and crowded into the corridor outside, where the doors had been left open so they could hear. Faculty from other departments stood in the back. Several figures in diplomatic uniforms sat in a cluster near the top of the tiered seating, watching with careful, neutral expressions. Grand Scholar Ivan was among them, his massive old body settled into a reinforced chair, his ancient eyes fixed on the small human standing at the front of the room. Do-hyun looked out at them all. He did not bring up the display. He did not activate any images or maps or diagrams. He simply stood there, hands at his sides, and spoke. "For the past semester," he said, "I have shown you how humans fight. You have seen our invasions, our sieges, our weapons of mass destruction, our guerrilla wars, and our acts of individual courage. You have studied us, you have analyzed us, you have run your simulations and your models. Today is your last class. I am not going to present a case study. Instead, I am going to open the floor. You may ask me anything." The silence that followed was long and heavy. Students glanced at each other. Tella's 4 hands were folded tightly together. Ogun stared straight ahead. Fail sat motionless, her dark eyes unblinking. Then, Rosha raised her hand. She was still sitting in the back row where she always sat. Her blue-green Velkai skin caught the light as she lifted her webbed hand. And her voice, when she spoke, was calm and clear, though Do-hyun could see the tension in her shoulders. "Professor Han," she said, "if humanity went to war with the Galactic Union, what would happen?" The room stopped breathing. Every student, every faculty member, every diplomat turned to look at Do-hyun. The question hung in the air like a blade. It was the question they had all been thinking since the first lecture. The question none of them had been brave enough to ask. Do-hyun looked at Sora. She was standing near the side wall, arms crossed, her face calm. She gave him a small nod. He turned back to the room. "I will answer honestly," he said. "I will not boast, and I will not threaten. I will simply tell you what I believe would happen." He took a breath. "In a direct engagement, humanity would lose. Your technology is superior. Your fleets are larger. Your weapons are more powerful. In open battle, you would destroy us." A ripple of relief passed through parts of the room. But Do-hyun was not finished. "But we would not surrender." The relief died. "We would retreat. We would regroup. We would study every weapon you used against us. And we would take them apart and learn how they worked. We would capture your technology and reverse engineer it. Within years, we would be building our own versions. Within a generation, we would improve on them." His voice was calm and even, almost gentle, like a teacher explaining something simple. "We would not meet you in open battle again until we were ready. In the meantime, we would wage a different kind of war. Every world you occupied would become a battleground. Every city would become a fortress. We would dig tunnels under your bases. We would set traps in your supply lines. We would turn every civilian into a potential threat. You would never know who among the population was a farmer and who was a fighter, because among humans, they are often the same person." Nobody moved. "We would commit to total war. That means every factory, every laboratory, every school, every mind in our entire civilization would be turned toward one single purpose: winning. Our economy would become a war economy. Our science would become war science. Our children would grow up learning 2 things: how to live and how to fight." He paused and looked around the room slowly. "And we would keep fighting for as long as it took. Generations, if necessary. Fathers would teach sons. Mothers would teach daughters. We would pass the war down like a sacred duty. Your soldiers fight for their commanders. Our soldiers fight for their families, their homes, their children, and their dead. And they do not stop." The room was absolutely silent. "You have better ships," Do-hyun said quietly. "You have more soldiers. You have stronger weapons, and older civilizations, and more experience among the stars. But you do not have what we have." He looked at Ogun. He looked at Tella. He looked at Fael and Rosha, and every face in that crowded, silent room. "You do not have 10,000 years of practice at refusing to die." Nobody spoke. The only sound was the soft hum of the station's systems, steady and indifferent. Then Ogun stood up. The massive Dravari rose to his full height, towering over the students around him. He looked down at Do-hyun, this small, soft creature from a small, soft world, and raised his right arm. He pressed his closed fist against his chest, directly over where a Dravari's heart sat, beneath the stone-like armor of their body. It was the Dravari salute of respect. It was given only to those a warrior considered a true equal. In 600 years, no Dravari had ever given it to a member of another species. One by one, others followed. Amirian lowered all 4 of her hands, palm down on the desk. a gesture of intellectual surrender, an admission that she had been wrong. A Velkai student touched his forehead and then extended his hand outward. A Velkai gesture meaning, "I see you clearly now." Others made gestures Do-hyun did not recognize, from species he had barely spoken to, but the meaning was the same across every culture in the room. Fail did not move. She sat perfectly still, her thin hands flat on the desk, her pale face expressionless. But her voice carried clearly through the silence. "Now I understand," she said, "why the Linnesi Council voted to welcome humanity into the Union. It was not kindness, it was not generosity." She paused. It was fear. The lecture ended. Students filed out in silence. The diplomats left quickly, their faces unreadable. The faculty followed. Grand Scholar Ivan was the last to leave. He waited until the hall was empty, then walked slowly down the tiered steps to where Do-hyun was packing his data case. The old Dravari stood in front of him, his cracked gray face showing every one of his 400 years. "In 4 centuries of teaching at this academy," Ivan said, "I have overseen thousands of lectures on the history of warfare across hundreds of species." Do-hyun looked up at him. "I have never," Ivan said slowly, "been more frightened by a semester of lectures." He paused. "Thank you, Professor Han." He turned and walked out of the lecture hall, his heavy footsteps echoing down the empty corridor until they faded into silence. The semester ended quietly. There was no ceremony, no formal closing, no speeches. Do-hyun packed his things into the same data case he had carried on his first day, and Sora helped him clear the small office they had been given near the lecture hall. The room was plain and bare, a desk, 2 chairs, a shelf that had held a few data tablets. It looked the same as it had when they arrived, as if nothing had happened here at all. But something had happened. They both knew it. The whole station knew it. 3 days after the final lecture, the Galactic Union Intelligence Bureau released a classified report. It was marked for senior officials and military commanders only, but within a week, portions of it had been leaked to the diplomatic networks, and from there to the broader Union press. The report concerned the reclassification of humanity's threat assessment. When humans had first joined the Union 12 years ago, they had been assigned a Category 3 rating, developing. It meant they were considered a young species with limited technology, no interstellar military capability, and no significant strategic threat. Category 3 species were watched the way adults watch children, with patience and mild caution, nothing more. The new report changed humanity's classification to Category 7. Category 7 was called Apex Predator. In the entire history of the Galactic Union, only 2 other species had ever held that designation, and both of them had earned it through devastating interstellar wars that had reshaped entire regions of the galaxy. Humanity had not fought a single battle in space. They had no fleet worth mentioning. Their technology was generations behind the major powers. The reclassification was not based on any of that. It was based entirely on the psychological and historical profile compiled from Do-hyun's lectures. The Intelligence Bureau's conclusion was simple and blunt. Any species that had survived what humanity had survived, that had done to itself what humanity had done to itself, and that was still expanding outward into the galaxy with its aggression and creativity fully intact, was not a developing civilization. It was a dormant threat of the highest order. The report's final line read, "The danger of humanity is not what they can do now. It is what they will do when given a reason." Across the galaxy, in the weeks and months that followed, 4 students carried what they had learned back to their own worlds. Tella returned to the Myrian Collective. She was quiet during the long journey home, spending most of her time alone in her quarters, her 4 hands moving over equations that she wrote and erased and wrote again. She had always believed that war could be understood through mathematics, that every battle was a problem with a solution, every conflict a system of variables that could be modeled and predicted. Humans had broken that belief. She published a paper 6 months later. It was titled The Irrational Variable: Why Mathematical Models Fail to Predict Human Warfare. In it, she argued that all existing Moraean combat models contained a fatal flaw. They assumed that combatants would act in their own rational self-interest. Humans did not. Humans acted on conviction, on emotion, on loyalty to ideas and people and places that no equation could measure. Her conclusion was stark. Human behavior in conflict cannot be modeled because humans do not behave rationally under pressure. They behave with conviction. No equation has ever been written that accounts for a soldier who knows he will die and attacks anyway. Until we can quantify the human willingness to suffer for a cause, all of our models are incomplete. The paper became the most read military theory publication in Mirian history. It was still being debated years later. Ogun returned to the Dravari Empire. He had been one of the finest students the Academy had ever produced, and his return was expected to be a moment of pride. A young warrior coming home with knowledge that would strengthen the Empire's already legendary military tradition. Instead, Ogun requested an immediate audience with the War Council, the highest military body in Dravari civilization. He stood before the 12 senior commanders in their hall of black stone and delivered a single recommendation. Under no circumstances should the Dravari Empire enter into armed conflict with humanity. The War Council was surprised. They asked him to explain. Ogun, who had spent his entire life believing that the Dravari were the greatest warriors in the galaxy, looked at the 12 most powerful military leaders of his species and said, "Because they will not stop. We fight until the battle is decided. They fight until the war is over. And for humans, the war is never over. They carry it with them. They pass it to their children. They write it into their songs and their stories and their blood. If we go to war with them, we will win the first battle. We may win the first 10 battles, but they will keep coming. They will learn. They will adapt. And one day, they will win the last battle. That is the only one that matters." The War Council sat in silence for a long time after he finished. No vote was taken that day, but within a year, the Dravari Empire quietly added humanity to a very short list of species that were never to be provoked under any circumstances. Fail returned to the Lenesi homeworld and did not speak to anyone for 3 weeks. She went to a meditation retreat in the mountains above her family's home and sat alone in a bare stone room, wrapped in silence, trying to process what she had felt and learned. The Lenesi prided themselves on their understanding of emotion. They were telepaths. They believed they understood fear, courage, love, and grief better than any species that could not feel the inner lives of others. Do-hyun's lectures had taught her that they did not understand humans at all. When she finally emerged, thin and tired and quiet, she sat with her mentor, an old Lenesi teacher who had trained diplomats for over a century, and told him what she had come to understand. "I thought I knew what it was. I thought it was the absence of fear, or the mastery of fear, or perhaps a chemical state that some species could access and others could not. I was wrong." Her mentor waited. "I felt their fear," Fail said. "Not directly. They were recordings, histories, long dead. But I could imagine it, and even the imagining was almost more than I could bear. The fear was enormous, constant, overwhelming. Every human soldier in every battle Professor Han described was terrified. They all were." She paused. "Courage is not the absence of that fear. Courage is what humans built on top of it. It is a structure they construct in the middle of terror, made of duty, love, stubbornness, pride, and something else I do not have a word for. They are afraid every moment, and they act anyway. It is the most terrifying thing I have ever encountered in any species." Her mentor was silent for a long time. Then he said, "And this is why the council voted to admit them?" "Yes," Vale said. "Not because we wanted them close, because we did not want them far away, where we could not see what they were becoming." Rosha did not go home. While the others returned to their own worlds, the Velkai students submitted an application for an exchange year on Earth. It was approved within days. Humanity's diplomatic corps was eager to host an alien student, and Rosha's academic record was excellent. She arrived on Earth on a cool autumn morning, stepping off the shuttle onto solid ground beneath an open sky, and for the first time in her life, she breathed air that was not recycled through a space station's filters. She visited the beaches of a place called Normandy, where she stood on the sand and looked out at the gray water, and tried to imagine what it had been like on that morning Do-hyun had described. The boats, the gunfire, the boys who knew they would die, and went anyway. She visited the ruins of cities that had been besieged and starved and bombed and rebuilt. She stood in a park in a city called Hiroshima, where a single bomb had once erased everything, and where now children played under cherry trees and old men sat on benches feeding birds. That was the part she had not expected. Not the destruction. She had been prepared for that. It was the rebuilding. Everywhere she went, she found the same thing. Humans had suffered something terrible, and then they had cleaned up the rubble and started again. They built new cities on top of the ashes of old ones. They planted gardens in craters. They turned battlefields into museums and graveyards into places of quiet beauty. And they brought their children there and told them what had happened, not to frighten them, but so they would remember. On her last night on Earth, Rosha stood outside her host family's home and looked up at the sky. The stars were faint. The city lights washed most of them out, but she could see a few, and she knew that somewhere up there, dozens of species looked down at this small blue world and saw a threat. But standing here with her feet on their soil and their air in her lungs, she understood something they did not. Humans did not see themselves as dangerous. They saw themselves as survivors. Every war, every weapon, every scar on their history was not a source of pride. It was a wound they carried. They did not celebrate what they were capable of. They mourned it. And then they got up the next morning and tried to be better. That, she thought, was the most human thing of all. Do-hyun and Sora boarded the shuttle home on a quiet Tuesday. The docking bay was nearly empty. No one came to see them off. The semester was over, the lectures were done, and Station Orith was already preparing for the next term. Sora settled into her seat and watched the station shrink through the viewport as the shuttle pulled away. After a while, she said, "Do you think it made a difference?" Do-hyun was quiet for a long time. He watched the stars outside the window, vast, cold, and endless, and thought about the faces of his students. Tella, with her equations that could not account for the human heart. Ogun, who had given him a salute reserved for equals. Fail, who had discovered that courage was built on top of fear. Rosha, who had stayed behind to walk through the ashes and the gardens. Every species in the Union thinks the most dangerous thing about humans is that we fight, he said finally. But that is not it. The most dangerous thing about us is that we fight each other, constantly, brutally, for thousands of years, and we still chose to reach for the stars instead of giving up. He turned to look at Sora. That is what scared them. Not our wars, our stubbornness to survive them. Sora looked at him, then back at the stars. There was nothing to say. The shuttle flew on, carrying two humans home through the dark, back to their small blue world on the edge of the galaxy. The world that should have destroyed itself 100 times over, but never did. The world that every species in the Union now watched with quiet, careful respect. Behind them, on a secure diplomatic channel, a new advisory was being transmitted to every member species of the Galactic Union. It was appended to every official file, every intelligence brief, and every military assessment that mentioned humanity. It was short, and it was clear, and within a year, every commander, every diplomat, and every scholar in the galaxy had read it. It said, regarding the species known as humans, originating from Sol 3, do not invade their worlds, do not threaten their children, do not corner them. Above all, do not give them a reason to unite. They are at their most dangerous when they have something to protect. The advisory carried no signature. It needed none. Every species that read it understood exactly why it had been written. And somewhere on a small blue planet, under a sky full of stars they were only beginning to reach, 8 billion humans woke up that morning and went about their lives, building, arguing, loving, grieving, creating, and stubbornly, relentlessly refusing to stop. The same way they always had, the same way they always would.